Good day, students of economics. The purpose of this video is to review the principles of market economics. By now, students should have familiarized themselves with market economics. Therefore, this is a brief review, assuming students have already read the chapter content on market economics and familiarized themselves with these important principles. What is a market? A market is an institution which brings together buyers and sellers. Assume there are a large number of buyers and a large number of sellers. It's the rationing function of prices, the invisible hand, that leads us to the outcome economists are interested in. And that outcome is called equilibrium. Identify on the graph, price is measured on the vertical axis, quantity measured on the horizontal axis. Economists are most interested in the behavior of buyers and sellers and how their interactions lead to equilibrium on the graph labeled P star and Q star. Remember, in the product market, the buyers, the downward sloping demand curve, are households and the sellers are businesses. And in the resource market, it's the opposite. The downward sloping demand curve are businesses. Businesses demand the economic inputs, factors of production of land, capital, and labor, and households supply those inputs. The downward sloping demand curve, what is demand? It's a schedule of the various amounts of a good or service or resource that buyers are willing and able to purchase, series of prices, specified amount of time. The downward sloping demand curve demonstrates that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Price goes up, there'll be a decrease in quantity demanded. Price declines, there'll be an increase in quantity demanded. Economists refer to this idea as the law of demand. Why is there an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded? 4 reasons. Common sense, diminishing marginal utility, the income effect, and substitution effect. If you do not remember these, please review them. Other things equal, a change in price will cause a movement along a single demand curve. What is supply? The various amounts of a good or a service or a resource that sellers are willing and able to make available for sale, series of prices, specified amount of time. So that schedule of price versus quantity supplied. There is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Price up, an increase in quantity supplied. Producers are incentivized to make more available for sale. Price down, a decrease in quantity supplied. The ever important P star Q star equilibrium. Buyers are attempting to maximize utility, the happiness, satisfaction, and gratification from consuming a good or service or acquiring a resource. Sellers are trying to maximize profit, as if led by the invisible hand, the rationing function of prices. The market brings us to this point where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, equilibrium. Remember, equilibrium is a starting point, a launching point, not a permanent position. But what happens when something other than price changes? When something other than price changes, a market event that affects demand or supply, we're no longer going to be discussing a movement along a single demand curve or a single supply curve. We're going to talk about a shift in demand, a change in demand, or a shift or change in supply. So economists are so creative, we call these the non-price determinants of demand and the non-price determinants of supply. Read it, learn it, live it. You should know these by heart. 5 non-price determinants of demand and the 6 non-price determinants of supply. So we conveniently have all 4 shifts in front of us on this beautiful slide, demonstrating either an increase in demand, a decrease in demand, an increase in supply, or a decrease in supply, conveniently labeled graph A, B, C, and D. Let's discuss the 5 non-price determinants of demand. An increase or a decrease in the taste or preference of a good, service, or resource, right? This is pretty much commonsensical, guys. If something becomes more popular, graph A, there'll be an increase in demand. But most important, what would that do to equilibrium, price, and quantity? A rightward shift of the demand curve causes price to go up and equilibrium quantity to increase. Obviously, if something went out of favor, graph B, a leftward shift, a decrease in demand from D1 to D2, The result at the new equilibrium, price down, quantity down. Number of buyers, again, this one's commonsensical. Increase in the number of buyers in a market, increase in demand, decrease in number of buyers, decrease in demand. Buyer's income, this one again is generally straightforward as long as you are discussing normal goods. Just be careful about inferior goods. Now remember, we're not making a judgment statement here, we're just saying if we're analyzing the market for things like retreaded tires, generic food items, used cars, any item economists would label an inferior good, there's that opposite relationship between buyer's income and changes in demand. In class, we came up with examples of substitute goods and complementary goods. Oftentimes, buyers are almost equally happy between purchasing two goods. So for instance, rice and potatoes. Right? Complementary goods, goods that are used in conjunction with each other. In class, discuss the idea of the things you love that you're addicted to, those smartphones and the accessories for smartphones. So an increase in the price of a substitute will cause an increase in the demand for the other product. A decrease in the price of the substitute will cause a decrease in demand for the other product. Complementary goods work the opposite. An increase in the price of a substitute decreases the demand for the complementary good or service. You get the idea. All right, expectations. Expectations about future product price, expectations about future product availability, expectations about future income will also shift the curve. Now, the 6 non-price determinants of supply. I labeled these in what I think are the most important, being 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll talk about 5 and 6 as well. So now we're looking at the bottom 2 graphs labeled C and D, shifts in the supply curve. Producers need inputs, factors of production, resources to manufacture goods and services. Any increase in the price of resources will shift the supply curve left. The entire market supply curve, just like graph D down bottom, will shift to the left, a decrease in supply. What happens when there's a decrease in supply to equilibrium price and quantity? Look what happens. Price up, quantity down at the new equilibrium. If resource prices become less expensive, a rightward shift in supply. Graph C, new equilibrium, price down, quantity up. Again, be certain you understand what happens to equilibrium price and quantity when there's a shift in demand or supply. Number of sellers, duh, and again, very easy. More sellers enter a market, rightward shift in supply. Sellers exit a market, leftward shift in supply. This will become extremely important when we evaluate in microeconomics the 4 market models when we discuss monopolistic competition and pure competition when there are no barriers to entry and firms enter and exit an industry based on the availability of profits, and we'll talk about this idea of dynamic adjustments. But it's pretty straightforward. If there aren't any barriers to entry preventing new firms from entering a market, the number of sellers will adjust based on profit motives. All right, taxes, subsidies. There's an old adage, if you want more of something, tax it less. If you want less of something, tax it more. Any increase of government taxes on producers will decrease supply. Any decrease in taxes will increase supply. Subsidies. Somebody in class came up with a very good example of this. So as subsidies, think of subsidies as taxes in reverse. The government actually hands out monies to certain industry to incentivize more production. And the good example that the student came up with was, look what happened during the pandemic. Right? Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and who was the other big pharmaceutical company? I think it was, it's escaping me at the moment. It might have been SmithKline Beecham. They all received large subsidies to do research for vaccines. Why? Look at graph C down bottom. We wanted an increase in the production of vaccinations to fight the COVID-19, right? And that actually brought down the price. Ridiculously, we gave away these vaccines. So that's a good example of the government intervening in market, giving out subsidies to incentivize more production, and the output will be at a lower price. Technology. Generally speaking, there are improvements in technology that shift the supply curve to the right, an increase in productivity with a result of lower prices and increased quantity. There can be disruptions of technology. Number Non-price determinant of supply, number 5, price of other goods. If a producer can easily shift inputs or resources between the production of two types of outputs, price of other goods is a discerning factor. So for instance, a farmer can grow either soy or corn, assuming the farmer has 20 acres of land, plants on 16 of it, and lets the other 4 furlough or recover every year. So assume the farmer is producing 8 acres of corn and 8 acres of soy for the last 5 years, and now expects the price of soy to increase next year. We would expect a rightward shift in the supply based on expectations of the price of the other good, right? So that only applies if manufacturing producers can shift inputs or resources quite efficiently in between two types of outputs. Now, price expectations, this one's even more challenging to come up with examples, but the book talks about assume that oil has already been extracted from the well and is sitting on tankers, and the owners of the oil now expect price of oil to increase in the future. They may withhold sale of that oil today based on expectations of higher future price of oil. One other brief comment about price of other goods. The book briefly also discusses the price of complementary output. So for instance, drilling for oil also yields natural gas. So if the price of natural gas was going up, producers of oil may be incentivized to drill for more oil, understanding that they also get the benefit of a complementary type of output. Again, that's a rare occasion, but it's just something to keep in the back of your head for that tricky AP exam question. Oh no, students, don't look now. Complex cases. Everything in life should be as simple as possible, if not simpler. Who said that? Let me give you a hint. A man exponentially smarter than Mr. Kelly. And his name was Albert Einstein. Everything in life should be as simple as possible, if not simpler. And yet we're going to introduce complex cases. What happens if we're analyzing a market scenario and there is one event affecting demand and simultaneously another event affects supply? Well, look on the board here and you see a word that we haven't discussed yet. It begins with an I and ends in 8, indeterminate. Indeterminate is a fancy schmancy way of economists admitting there's not enough information to make a definitive judgment on either price or quantity. One of our two variables, we won't be certain what exactly happened to that variable. Remember, the entire purpose of market analysis is to determine what happened to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So I'm going to briefly discuss one of the examples of the 11 market scenarios that was given in the review packet. The market for whitefish, where whitefish becomes more popular with consumers, things like cod and tilapia. At the same time, the government cuts back or restricts the number of days that fishermen are allowed to extract the fishy from the ocean. All right. So we have one event affecting demand, and that's an increase in the taste or preference for whitefish. At the same time, an event affecting supply. If fishermen, the boats aren't allowed to fish, let's say they reduce it from 45 days to 30 days, there's going to be a decrease in the number of sellers. So those are our two market events. So the increase in demand resembles graph A up on the left, right? So what happens when there's an increase in demand because of an increase in taste and preferences, a rightward shift to the demand curve? That has the effect of price going up and quantity increasing at the new equilibrium when D1 shifts to D2. Now, at the same time, there's a decrease in the number of sellers, a leftward shift in supply similar to graph D. And what happens there? Well, that also causes price to go up, but causes quantity to go down. Now, I love watching Sesame Street with my nieces and nephew because there's so much adult humor that you missed when you were 4 years old. Remember that segment, which one of these things is not like the other? It's that simple, boys. So we look at the graphs again and we say, okay, the increase in demand, graph A, definitely caused price to go up, quantity to go up. The decrease in supply, graph D, definitely caused price to go up, but quantity to decrease. So price definitely went up. Quantity is what we call indeterminate. So if the market scenario info given to you in the problem doesn't distinguish or say there was a significant increase in the taste and preferences and only a small decline in the number of sellers, there's no way to determine what happened to one of the two variables, in this case, quantity. For certain, price went up, quantity is indeterminate. So be careful when asked to analyze market scenarios where two events, one affecting demand and one affecting supply, occur simultaneously. The outcome will be one of your two variables, price or quantity, will be indeterminate. Now it's time to put students to work, utilizing the tools of market economics and the concepts of demand and supply. Analyze market scenarios. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Follow the four-step approach. Number one, identify the market, and by all means, gentlemen, draw a graph. And look, in red it says a correctly labeled graph. On the AP exam, you actually get 1 point towards your score just by drawing the graph correctly and labeling it. Label the vertical axis as price, label the horizontal axis as quantity, label the downward sloping curve as demand, the upward sloping curve as supply, identify equilibrium price and quantity to start. Every time you analyze a market scenario, it begins with the same number one approach. Number two, here's where it gets a little challenging. Read over the scenario and identify which non-price determinant of demand or supply, or the rare case both, are changing in the market. It's vitally important to identify which of the 5 non-price determinants of demand or the 6 non-price determinants of supply is affecting the market. After you've done the heavy lifting in number 2, then demonstrate what you have learned and identified in part 3. Demonstrate the change in demand and or supply on the graph. Now, if there are 2 events, one affecting demand and one affecting supply, and it does not specify the magnitude of the shift, in other words, it doesn't say there's a large increase in demand or a small increase in supply or vice versa, you must draw 2 graphs. Finally, and most importantly, ding, 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 identify the effects on market equilibrium. How will the events affect equilibrium price and quantity? It is vitally important to the outcome of your analysis to perform step number 4. Otherwise, you took the ball all the way to the goal line and you didn't cross the finish line. It's time to put students to work. Analyze these 3 market scenarios. Use the tools of demand and supply to determine what happens to equilibrium price and quantity in each market. Number 1, pandemic incentivizes millions of older Americans to retire early and millions of other workers to leave the labor force for fear of contracting COVID-19. How will this phenomenon affect the U.S. labor markets? Avocados. Oh, I love guacamole. Avocados continue to grow in popularity with U.S. consumers. At the same time, a severe drought in California negatively impacts the avocado growing season. Notice, how will these 2 events affect the market for avocados? And finally, potential home buyers looking to purchase an existing home, not newly built homes, and existing homes, believe home prices, housing prices, will fall substantially in 6 months. How will this news affect the current market for existing homes? All right, now the answers are on the videos to follow, but guess what? You can't have the answers yet. Pause the video. All right, you've been watching for 20 minutes. Pause the video here and work on these 3 market scenario problems and determine, based on market economics and the tools of demand and supply, what is the outcome at the new equilibrium. Okay, time to see how we did, students. Pandemic incentivizes millions of older Americans to retire and millions of other workers to leave the labor force for fear of contracting COVID-19. How will this phenomenon affect the U.S. labor market? Well, the market should have been obvious, the U.S. labor market. The non-price determinant, remember, in a market for labor, the buyers, downward sloping demand, businesses, supply, upward sloping supply, sellers, that is households. So the non-price determinant is a decrease in the number of sellers. Fewer individuals are willing to sell their labor in the labor market. That will lead to a decrease in supply, similar to graph D on our 4-graph examples. Leftward shift of the supply curve. What happens at the new equilibrium because of the decrease in supply? Price up, quantity down. Now here, price is wages. And look what happened to wages after the reopening of the economy post-pandemic. Wages went up in price quite substantially. Now, that's not the only factor affecting wages, but there has been a decrease in labor participation post-COVID. The second market scenario, avocados. So first, avocados continue to grow in popularity with U.S. consumers. Let's tackle this portion of the problem before we move on to the second market event. Anytime a good or service becomes more popular, that's a non-price determinant of demand, increased taste and preferences. So the market is obviously avocados. The non-price determinant, taste and preferences will increase. That will cause a rightward shift of the demand curve. The whole entire curve shifts from D1 to D2. Result at new equilibrium, price up, quantity up. If that were the only thing that had happened in this market scenario, your work would be finished. But it wasn't just the factor affecting demand. At the same time, severe drought in California negatively impacts avocado growing season. So again, the market's avocados, the non-price determinant, decreased number of sellers, or you may have come up with decrease or disruption in technology. Either one of those non-price determinants will work. That causes a leftward shift of the supply curve. Leftward shift of supply causes what? Price increase, quantity decrease. Again, if this were the only event that happened, the new equilibrium would be higher equilibrium price, decrease in equilibrium quantity. But considering both simultaneously, what happens? Final results, the increase in demand drove up price. The decrease in supply drove up price. The increase in demand quantity up. The decrease in supply quantity down. Price up, quantity indeterminate. That was a challenging one. Hopefully you did well on that problem. Last one. Market for existing homes. Now it says here, not newly built houses. So we're analyzing the market for existing homes, and buyers believe that prices will fall substantially in 6 months. One of the non-price determinants of demand is expectations. Expectations about future product price. So the market is existing homes, the non-price determinant, expectations about future prices, and in this case, future lower prices. How will that affect the market? A decrease in the demand for homes now with the expectation of prices dropping in the future. At the new equilibrium, what happens? Leftward shift of demand from D1 to D2. The new equilibrium, price of homes down, quantity of homes bought and sold down as well. Hopefully you did well on this market analysis review packet.